What's good, Ken Gonda? It's your boy O'Shea Duke Jackson. Back at it again with another interview here on this channel. And guys, make sure you like the video, subscribe, hit the bell. And we are here with another interview with the Afripolitan Podcast. I'll let her introduce herself and what her channel is about.
So, hi everyone, and my name is Venny, and I'm the creator and host of the Afripolitan Podcast. And the podcast is about sharing the experiences that African millennials face within a diaspora. So it's about traveling whilst you're Black. It's about society and cultural topics, and also about Pan-Africanism as well, because I am a Pan-African, and I'm glad to be back on the Kinganda channel. So thank you, O'Shea.
All right, and thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming over today and talking about this. And the last interview that we did was very good and got really good amount of good views. And people were very excited to hear from your perspective. But one of the things that you said in that interview, and some people like Mr. Uganda, who's also a British YouTuber from Ugandan descent like yourself, he said there was a time in Britain where it was just not cool to be African. You remember that, right?
Of course, yeah, for sure. So when I grew up in London in England before I then went to study in Wales for the end of primary school and secondary school, high school, like you guys say. So I remember in primary school, it wasn't like a thing to be African. Like, it was all about being Caribbean was cool. Even besides listening to hip hop and R&B from the USA, the popular genre was Jamaican music, dancehall, bashment, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, it wasn't cool to be African, and even there was sort of this thing of African versus Carribeans, and it was bad. It was really, really bad. And I would say, I mean, my experience was different because when I went to Wales, I was in a white area. So at the end of primary school and secondary school, I was predominantly around white people. But I remember the shift started to change just before we got into like 2010, so maybe from like 2008 onwards. That's when I started to realize that the sort of popular Nigerian music started to come about. So those songs were sort of more popping, and then even when I was in university, it was all about Afrobeats, which is predominantly Nigerian music and Ghanaian music and maybe some South African music. So that's when people really started to I think embrace the culture more, embrace their Africanness more, embrace their identity. And then, popular culture, not just even music, but fashion as well. African print, you start to see that on the catwalks. So yeah, but back in the day, for sure, it was not cool. It was not cool to be African. Africa was associated with being, fresh, fresh off the boat, maybe being backwards, being poor, like when you see Africa, even today on TV, they're always showing, slums, people in poverty, or we need charity, we need people to come, and all of this stuff. So that was the attachment it had to us in the UK back in the day, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But this was because you have a lot of. Let me kind of go back in London, because I know that in London you have the African community, and then there's the Caribbean community. Which of the communities are larger? Is it more Africans or more Caribbeans?
I would say so. Maybe the Caribbean community, but I would say the top. I'd say that the Caribbean community have been here for longer than the African community. They've been here for years during the Windrush generation when they came over. So their presence in the UK has been a lot more than the African community. So like continental Africans. So I'd say maybe the presence became with continental Africans coming to UK maybe from the 80s, I may be wrong, 80s onwards and 90s. So I know in the present day that the West African community is the biggest within the UK, so Nigerians and Ghanaians. And then I would say in the Caribbean community, the biggest community is the Jamaican community. So I'm not sure off the top of my head which is the largest one, but for sure the Caribbean community was here before the continental Africans came.
So let me ask you this then. Let's exclude the Caribbean community and just deal with the African cohort. That means, those Ugandan, Kenyan, maybe some of the Francophone people that's in English. So, okay, I could see maybe if the Caribbean community was saying, oh yeah, you guys are just off the boat, because that kind of happens amongst African Americans and Africans. That kind of back and forth can happen. But let's exclude them. Did other Africans look down on other Africans from coming from Africa within the continental African community?
No, I wouldn't say that at all, because we would all be in the same boat. But what I do remember, and I think also from hearing other, from hearing Nigerians speak who maybe grew up in the 90s like myself, I feel back in the day we were a bit more like our parents' generation. When they came over, they were in their own communities. So maybe you'd go to Ugandan parties. Our parents would go to, maybe Ugandan churches, and maybe the same with the Nigerian community or the Kenyan community and so forth. So I don't ever recall there being an intercultural clash in terms of oh, we're better than you and so forth. The only thing I would say is that because there are, we're all Africans and we're all, we all have our unique differences. But I think also because of that, there were certain stereotypes that were attached to different communities. So, oh, Nigerians are like this, Caribbeans are like this, and so forth.
Okay, so was there ever a strife between the Caribbean community and then the African community when you were coming up in London?
I would say there was I don't want to say a strife as such, but it was kind of there were these stereotypes of Jamaicans are, they're rude, or they have attitudes, or they're like this X, Y, and Z. And then, then there was the thing of Nigerians are like X, Y, and Z, or Nigerians are maybe the stereotypes of they're scammers, or they're not trustworthy, or do you know what I mean? It was more catty stereotypes as opposed to, but I wouldn't say it was a real real bad clash. No, if that makes sense.
So let me ask you this then. No, it makes perfect sense. So I'm kind of just fact finding here. So let's say in the 90s you were growing up, or in 2000. So I'm a black person. I'm living in North London. Someone comes up and asks me where I'm from. I know I'm from Uganda. Was it common for somebody to just say, knowing that I'm from Uganda, I would then say I'm from the Caribbean because I wanted to look better. I wanted to look cool.
I'm sure I did it at one point.
You did it.
I have a feeling I did. But yeah, a lot of people were not trying to say that they weren't trying to say that they were from their countries. I even remember when I was in primary school, my teacher, when I was in London before I went to Wales, she was Nigerian, but she used to call herself oh, I'm a British Nigerian. So I remember I used to go home. I'm like, yeah, Mum, I'm a British Ugandan. I'm not Ugandan. I'm British Ugandan. That's what it was like. It was trying to anglicize yourself.
Okay.
Not trying to be oh, I'm African, because there was that negative stereotype of being African.
Now, let me ask you this, because obviously, did white people prefer, in your opinion, oh, well, the Caribbean community, if in when the Belgium had the, Rwanda and Burundi, they preferred one tribe over the other because of the features. I forgot which one it was. In your opinion, did you think that Caucasians would look more favorable on people from the Caribbean communities versus people from the African communities? Did you feel that was the case?
No, I wouldn't say that. Because I think we're all black at the end of the day. They can't tell if somebody's Nigerian or they're Jamaican. They can't tell the difference. So I would never say I don't remember hearing anything from like the white community regarding that. It was more amongst ourselves, I would say.
Okay, so then basically the blacks out of the blue within each other that were the Africans just said we're not from Africa, we're from somewhere else. That just happened out the blue.
I think it was because when I take it back to what was portrayed of Africa, do you know what I mean? Like, oh, where it's a poor state, it's a poor continent. We need, even these. I don't know if you remember the song. Is it "We Are the World" or what's that song?
Yeah, Michael Jackson. Yeah.
Yeah, all of that stuff, all of that negative stuff, and I think also continental African culture was not really in mainstream media like it is today.
Right.
So what was in the mainstream media besides the USA hip hop, the USA R&B, and maybe the Black British artists we had in the UK? A lot of the influences were, if it wasn't African American culture, it was Jamaican culture. So you had like Beanie Man, you had all those like 90s popular dancehall songs. So that was the popular culture, like with everyone like dancing and all of that. That was what was in. So you wanted to sort of be associated with that. If you were saying you're African, you weren't. Now, if you say you're African, if you say you're Nigerian, people are going to think of Wizkid, Burna Boy. They're going to be thinking of Afrobeats. They're going to be thinking of all the amazing like Nigerian fashion designers that you have. Like now, it's like West African culture dominates. Dominates like popular culture.
Oh yeah, even in Uganda, like
exactly,
you hear it all in the club.
Exactly. And it wasn't like that a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, when I used to go back to Uganda, dancehall. Ugandans love dancehall, Jamaican music. Huge. They love it. Even our own local music is very much based on dancehall. So it's like the Caribbean culture has always been a massive influence. So that's why back in the day we wanted to be more associated with that, as opposed to being associated with our African culture.
Let me actually ask you this, and shout out to DJ Nacello. We have some Club Kinganda episodes here, and the dance hall video music that we did. It got a lot of views. One of my favorite Ugandan, you saw it before. So one of my favorite Ugandan dancehall artists is Nutty Nathan. So if you ever heard of him before, he's really good. What I want to do is I want to talk about this because there's a lady that's by the name of Sincerely Agosa. I don't know if you know who she is.
Oh yeah, I think Cecily Uosa.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. She's a Nigerian British. She's a Nigerian YouTuber. In Britain, and I don't know. She has a really, really big popular video that talks about why she only dates white men. And have you seen the one before?
Yes, but I think to add a disclaimer, I think it came out. Was it like 2 years, a couple of years? I didn't watch all of it. I think I saw a snippet, but I think now she does date black men, or maybe she's more open, because there was a video I watched last year where she was talking when she went back to Nigeria, and she was telling like an awful date she had with a Nigerian guy there. So I think now she is more open. I don't think it's more just open. White. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to kind of talk about that as far as the mindset of some people, because if you have, because I know that the London, it has more blacks concentrated in that city than other places, yes. But in London, because people did not want to be associated with Africa, some people didn't, at least. Was it then safe to say that some people, they were trying to anglicize themselves? Were people looking more at that time to associate themselves with maybe dating people from Caucasians from Britain, to basically anglicize themselves more to get away from that bad stereotype, as to say, well, hey, I've now had me a white person, so that I've attained a level of status. Did you see that happening also at the time?
No, I wouldn't say I saw that, but I think also what Cecilia also talked about was the fact that she's a darker skinned female, and growing up, she wasn't deemed as desirable. So I think the main thing that was a problem that I remember, and it's still also a problem today, was the deep issue of colorism. So it was more like it was men being attracted to the mixed race girls, so the light skinned females or the girls who are biracial. That was the thing, as opposed to being attracted to someone who was darker skinned. Basically, that was the main thing of mixed race girls and mixed race guys, or lighter skinned black people were seen as more desirable within the black community. It wasn't, I didn't really see a thing of like people really wanting to like date outside their race. But I don't know, because I was young, so that wasn't really what I saw. But I think for me as well, when I mentioned earlier that I went to end of primary school and high school, I was in a predominantly white. In my primary school, when I moved to, I was the only black person. I think there was like maybe 2 mixed race people, but 100% black was me. And then when I was in secondary school, at the time, maybe there might have been like 10 black people in the whole school, or even less. And then if you include people of mixed heritage, it still wouldn't even come up to 20. So I was like in a predominantly white school. So the whole of my high school experience was not being desired by men because they found the white women attractive, or if you're maybe mixed race, or maybe you had a bit of like a tan, or there was something a bit exotic about you, then you'd be seen as desirable. But it was more as if men started, like the white guy started to be more attracted to me maybe towards the end of my secondary school journey, and just before I went to university. That's when they then all of a sudden started to be more attracted to me. So it was, I would say, growing up, what I remember, it was like mixed race females, or people who are of a lighter skin complexion, are more desirable within the black community. And definitely if you were in a white space, a predominantly white space, you were not going to be desired at all, especially maybe if you're mixed race and lighter skin, but even so, you still wouldn't be like the most desired person.
We're gonna go back to you understanding, because obviously now, I talked to Dejan Nasello, and he was saying that even in Uganda, when Nigerian music got hot, a lot of people didn't even want to support the local Ugandan music, right? They didn't even. So it's like, they kind of had the same issue that you had, because they were like, well, in the Ugandan markets, when Nigeria got big, their own artists, they were like, well, they were supporting the Nigerian artist. And you heard what happened with Omale. When Omale was in Uganda, I mean, they were supporting him more than the local artists. So I guess that problem still happened. But he said at some point, the Ugandan artists started coming around each other and started to appreciate themselves, even with the dance hall. Their own artists, they started appreciating themselves. So I guess the question is for you: when did a lot of the African community, you personally, because I know when Nigerians started, Africa started getting hot, and then the fashion scene started getting hot. But when did you start to appreciate yourself as like, what, I am a Ugandan woman. I'm proud of my, where I come from. When did you start to really take more appreciation of yourself?
For me, the journey started. So I think like when I was doing my A-levels, which is like the last 2 years of high school. So you do your A-levels and you get your qualifications, and you then go to university. So when I was doing that, at the time my sister was in university, I remember I went to visit her, and like Nigerian music was like banging at that time. And then like I'd go to like the parties with her, like the African Carribean society parties and all of that. And we also had like a family friend who was Nigerian, so she'd be playing like the music and whatnot. So I kind of started to sort of get into it a bit then. Not so much of Ugandan music, I have to admit, but my brother always listened to like, I grew up listening to Ugandan music, and my brother always used to play it, like, and the popular stuff. So I suppose I kind of didn't really like feel as if I needed to like really search into the Ugandan scene, because it was around me, if that makes sense. But when I then went to university in Leicester, which is a city in East Midlands. So Leicester is known for it has a large Asian community, and also it has a lot of Ugandan Asians as well. When Idi Amin expelled the Asians, a lot of them ended up going to Leicester. So I think that's today there's still a community there of Ugandan Asians. But the particular university I went to was a very multicultural university, and a lot of Black people from London go to that university, and also Birmingham and other cities within the Midlands where there's a lot of Black people do go to that university. So it's like I went from like a totally white space into like predominantly Black and Asian space. So when I was like going to like the university parties and stuff like that, I was being surrounded with like a lot of Black people. And even though my course, there was only 2 Black girls, including myself, on the course, but I started to like interact with like fellow Black people, and that's when I started to actually be around people that I could relate to. Because when I was in high school, I couldn't really relate to my friends like that. Like they didn't have the same upbringing that I had, and you know, there's just like certain things that if you're not from the same race, you're just not going to understand. But when I went to university, it's like we were all in the same boat. So if we were all like struggling one month and we hardly had any money, like, do you know what I mean? It wasn't like a big deal. But when I was like at school and all my friends are like from sort of like middle class, but I wouldn't like middle class backgrounds. Do you know what I mean? It was really, really challenging and quite hard. So university was the time where I really started to sort of, embrace myself, embrace my Ugandan culture, embrace my African identity, be around like-minded people, be around people that are like me and look like me. And then also as well, that's when I was then being around like men that are actually attracted to me, whereas before I was in a space where no guys were attracted to me. So, yeah.
Let me ask you this. Now that, I mean, obviously you have the Afripolitan Podcast, and you've been growing in the industry, and you've been back to Uganda, and now you really see the potentials on the continent of Africa. What would you say for people, maybe who have struggled with living in a country that is not represented with, a lot of, like America, obviously we have like 12%. And if you live in some place like Detroit or Chicago or Oakland, now you're talking about 30, 40, 50%. If you're in Jackson, Mississippi, it's like almost 85% Black. Wow. But what would you say for people that, that live in, maybe Ireland or some places like that, where, you don't have a lot of Blacks, but, you're still trying to maintain, who you are, and, be proud of yourself, and struggling with your identity and stuff like that? What advice would you give somebody that's going through that right now?
My advice would be to just try and find like-minded people. So I think in Ireland there is actually a Black community. I don't know if maybe it's more so in Dublin, I'm not too sure. But like in every city there's always going to be a Black community, however small it is.
Right.
So it's more of a case of maybe trying to find like-minded people. I think obviously Corona now is a hard time, but if it wasn't for Corona, maybe there's like Meetup where you can see if there's like an African group in your local area, or maybe going to like the African restaurants if you can find one, or even just simply going to like an African hairdresser's. You might go there and you might end up meeting fellow people. For me, whilst I was in university, I was fortunate enough to go to a multicultural university. So even though there was an African Caribbean society, I didn't need to join it because there was a lot of Black people. But with some universities in the UK, there isn't a lot of Black people. So if there is an ACS community and you're a student, joining an ACS community can help. So you're connecting with people that look like you. So I think it's just basically trying to find hobbies and interests that are related to the culture, and then networking with people from there. And even using social media as well helps.
Let's talk about social media, because, obviously, I was talking about my other community, which is It's pretty ghetto here on YouTube. Shout out to the my other community that I'm in. But what now with the with the internet and people like like Wody Maya out there and guys like that are really showing the positive sides of the continent. You have African Americans who are living in Africa. You have Britons like Blacksit. I don't know if you ever heard of them before. They're in the Gambia. Yeah, Blacksit. They're in the Gambia. They have like 40,000 subscribers. Mm-hmm. They're doing very well. And then you're starting to see a lot of these online communities. How important are these online communities into connecting the diaspora to the continent and to letting people? Because a lot of times back in the day, for me, when I thought about Uganda, I would think like, oh yeah, I mean, I think that's Idi Amin.
Yeah,
and Milton Obote. I mean, the guy with the messed up hair. But that's all I would know about. Like, but now with the with online communities and how do you think that's playing an important role in giving people more pride and connecting them to to the continent?
I think it's playing a huge, massive part. In terms of now we can go on YouTube and we can see the latest music videos from artists within the continent. We can follow them on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, Twitter, whatever you use, Snapchat. So we see that when they're coming to the UK, we can go to their concerts. Even content, creators like yourself and so many others are actually going to the continent, actually showing their journey into starting their businesses, or even just showing their journeys of traveling and embracing their culture, embracing their where their ancestors come from and so forth. So I think the internet, social media, is playing such a massive part in opening everyone's eyes to realize that the continent is is full of so much opportunities, and it's home. Like it's showing, social media is showing us what our home is really like without people even going there. And even when you go there, you can actually experience it for yourself, as and you'll see how amazing and how powerful it is to really be tied to the continent. And also, once again, social media is also helping like-minded people connect with each other. Like yourself, I'm connecting with you. I'm really appreciative for that. But also, I've also connected with other like-minded Ugandans and also people from the continent who are passionate about amplifying profiles of people, African people who really want to make an impact in the world.
All right. Well, I really do appreciate your time and coming on here. Talk a little bit about the Afripolitan Podcast, and for people that are going to subscribe to you here on YouTube or your podcast, what kind of information would they be expecting if they make that decision?
So thank you so much for having me again. So with the Afripolitan Podcast, I basically started it because I wanted to talk about some of the unique experiences that I've faced living within the UK as a Black Ugandan woman. So I share about my journeys regarding traveling whilst being Black. So I'm actually planning to drop an episode today where I went to Afropunk Paris Festival. And that was obviously before COVID. So I'm putting up vlogs of my traveling experiences. I'm also talking about, because I work in the fashion industry, I work in fashion production. So I'm also talking about how to get into the fashion industry as a Black creative, because we know that the creative industry is, especially fashion, it's something that's extremely appropriated by, they appropriate Black culture so much, but you hardly see any Black people successful behind the scenes. Forget the catwalks, but behind the scenes, you hardly see any Black people prospering. So I'm sharing my journey of how I got into the industry and how fellow Black creatives can get into the industry. I also want to talk about societal and cultural topics. So things pertaining to Pan-Africanism, and also, today we touched on a little bit about colorism and how it was like being an African growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. So topics like that as well I'll also be exploring. But I'm also open to collaborate with fellow-minded content creators who are passionate about the continent. So yeah, that's what I've got to say. But and also, yeah, please subscribe.
All right. So guys, make sure you go to the first comment pinned to the top. Check out the Afripolitan Podcast, and you can email us at teamkinganda@gmail.com. And we'll definitely be talking to you there. So guys, thank you so much. Subscribe, and always remember, keep it real. King Ghana forever. We out.